I have with me today the High Commissioner of Canada to India, Mr. Cameron MacKay. He's going to talk to us regarding the India-Canada bilateral relationship. Welcome to ThePrint, High Commissioner, and thank you for talking to us.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. So I'll quickly, ask you questions around the fact that what next for the relationship. This is a relationship that has seen tremendous growth in terms of business, trade, and also FDI inflows. But of late, we've seen for the last couple of years, there's been this constant tensions happening around the Khalistan issue, which was there, but then now we are hearing the government talking about some of the very serious issues. We've heard the Minister of External Affairs coming up with a travel advisory talking about hate crimes against Indian students. On November 6th, another referendum, a so-called referendum on the Khalistan issue is coming up. So my question to you is, what is the Canadian government doing about it?
Well, about the so-called referendum on Khalistan that I understand is being planned for the 6th, and there was one on September the 18th. This is a private activity. Frankly, the Canadian laws are very clear that people have the right to freedom of assembly, people have the right to freedom of expression. But the Canadian government does not support and does not recognize this so-called referendum. And the Canadian government, frankly, stands for a united, secure, and prosperous India. Mm-hmm. That's the Canadian government's view.
Mm-hmm. Sure, and we've heard that coming from the Canadian government time and again. But recently, the Ministry of External Affairs spokesperson talked about the fact that since there is no action being taken, there can be, an incident like a Kanishka bombing, and the fact that they are not getting any kind of response from the Canadian government in terms of what exact actions being taken against this, against the so-called Khalistani elements.
Well, again, I'll say Canada supports the sovereignty and territorial integrity of India, a united India. And with respect to questions about possible terrorism, national security concerns, etc., I can only assure you that the Canadian security and intelligence authorities work very closely with their Indian counterparts. We're all on exactly the same page when it comes to extremism and terrorism.
So there is a regular dialogue on that?
Absolutely, yes. And in fact, I'll give you some examples. We also have some concerns about cross-border crime between Canada and India. And so just over the last year, we've had the NIA from India visit Canada for outreach on this to talk to the Royal Canadian Mounted Police, the National Police Force in Canada. Royal Canadian Mounted Police were here last spring working closely with the NIA on training exercises to make sure that we can cooperate effectively together. The RCMP Commissioner was here just a couple of weeks ago meeting with her NIA counterparts. We have Canadian officials, a senior official from our Ministry of Finance is coming to India in just a few weeks at the end of November for the No Money for Terror conference. And we have a dialogue with India, a counterterrorism dialogue with India, which we're planning to hold in the coming months as well. So there's a lot of cooperation day to day between all of our security and intelligence forces. And again, I think no one can divide Canada and India in terms of us standing together against terrorism, extremism, cross-border crime.
Mm-hmm. Also, High Commissioner, what about the political relationship? Now, we heard and we saw Prime Minister Modi and Prime Minister Trudeau, exchanging pleasantries at the last G20 on the sidelines. We expect them probably to speak again in the upcoming G20. However, there had been these tensions concerning your PM making some remarks on the farmers' protest. Do you really think the political relationship needs to be put back on track where these tensions can be ironed out?
I think from my point of view, the relationship is back on track. We'd like to see it stay that way. I'm optimistic that the Indian government sees it the same way. I think occasionally between two big democracies like ourselves, there will be some tensions in relations. There will be irritants, as we call them in diplomacy, that need to be managed. But I think we're working very closely to try to manage those and frankly focus on the bigger issues. Canada and India have so much in common. Being democracies, being countries that support pluralism, we stand for rule of law domestically and internationally, a huge people-to-people relationship, a very large and growing economic relationship. These are the things that we really need to focus on at the same time as we stand for issues like national security and terrorism that you raised earlier.
Now, talking about the trade agreement, this has been going on for a long time, the negotiations for a comprehensive economic partnership agreement. I don't know what will be the new name given to the bilateral trade deal, but I do understand both sides have a lot of interest. However, I also believe that probably the negotiations will start afresh because it's been a long time. How do you see those talks? Where are they headed?
I think we're making good progress. Our Trade Minister Mary Eng and Commerce Minister Goyal relaunched our long-languishing trade and investment negotiations just in spring of this year. And they've made more progress in the negotiations since March of this year than we did in the previous 12 years of negotiations. So there's still a lot of ground to cover, I would say. There's still a lot of work to do, but the ministers are in very regular contact. They're both absolutely committing to working to move this forward. And I'm cautiously optimistic that we'll be able to come up with some kind of an early progress trade agreement, an EPTA, as a first step toward, then over the longer run, a comprehensive economic partnership agreement. There's so much economic opportunity on the table between Canada and India. I think both governments are committed to finding ways to seize that opportunity.
So how soon can we see the EPTA happening? I believe that's something that India did with Australia as well, like an early harvest and then a full-fledged deal. So my question to you would be, when can we see the EPTA happening, and what are some of the tricky issues do you think both sides will be facing going forward? Because farm subsidies and investments, movement of professionals have been some of the traditional hurdles.
Well, I can't speculate on when it will actually be completed. As soon as possible is, of course, what I'd like to see, and I know that the business communities in both countries would like to see that too. When I speak to Canadian business and Indian business and associations, I hear nothing but support for this deal. I know that they'd like to get it done quickly, but they're very complicated deals to negotiate, and there will be some sensitive issues like the ones that you mentioned, and it's for that reason that we're taking this approach of first an early progress trade agreement, try to get some of the so-called low-hanging fruit or some of the maybe less controversial issues, and then some other issues, of course, will take longer and have to wait to see fruition.
So would you be able to give some indication what will be those low-hanging fruits?
Well, maybe I'll just say that broadly speaking, Canada's approach to these trade agreements is very comprehensive and very ambitious. You may know that Canada is the only G7 country that has a free trade agreement with every other G7 country. We have 15 free trade agreements covering 52 countries around the world, 60% of the global economy covered by our FTAs. So we have considerable experience negotiating these, and we'd like to go as comprehensive and as ambitious as possible. Some of this is new ground for India, so I think that's where it'll take a little bit more time to sort out what can we each agree to in the EPTA and then later in the CEPA. But eventually, I think the deal will absolutely cover trade in goods, trade in services. We'd like it to cover investment or have some sort of an investment deal between the two countries. And then there are many other areas, as I think you know, that can be covered in a trade agreement. We'll leave it to the negotiators to negotiate that.
Well, interesting that you talk about investments, because that had been one issue where the relationship had been really growing. But then there was this talk about having an investment protection agreement. If you can give us, shed some light as to what's happening to that. And also, are the investments coming in as far as pension funds and infrastructure, are they still sort of interesting areas for Canada to look at as far as India is concerned?
Well, first let me say absolutely we'd like to have investment included in the deal that we're negotiating now, or a deal that accompanies it. There's currently no investment agreement between Canada and India, and yet Canadian investment is coming in. There would be much more if we could have a proper treaty between us. I think that's the case. We currently have a commercial relationship between the two countries that totals $100 billion. $70 billion of that is Canadian institutional and portfolio investment into India. So these are the big Canadian pension plans and big private investors like Fairfax and Brookfield that are investing across India in infrastructure, roads, highways, ports, airports, real estate, clean energy is a real focus for them. Frankly, it's Canadian capital that's helping to make in India and helping to build India.
That's interesting. And also, if I can ask you, as far as the investment protection agreement is concerned, will it be part of the trade deal or that will be separate?
Well, I'll let the negotiators negotiate on that. But what I can say is that absolutely an investment treaty between us, whether it's as part of a trade deal or accompanying it, I believe will absolutely encourage more Canadian investment into India, which is something that I think both countries would benefit from.
High Commissioner, you also talked about Make in India. Now, the Make in India initiative is seeing a massive push as far as defense procurement is concerned from the point of view of the Indian government. Now, in terms of defense and security partnership, the larger Indo-Pacific strategic initiative in which India is so now focusing on, where is Canada standing in all of these, and how do you see and perceive as far as the Chinese threat is concerned, keeping in mind the fact that there is a complete war that is going on between Russia and Ukraine, which has sort of upended all sorts of security partnership?
Let me come to the first part first, sure. Just about defense procurement, for example. We do have a considerable defense industry in Canada, more than 600 companies in that space, many of them engaging here in India as well. And we've already good cooperation in that regard with everything from, especially in the high-tech area, avionics, I would say submarine, maritime domain awareness, etc., right. Are good areas for cooperation so far. More broadly, Canada absolutely is an Indo-Pacific country. And we're always happy to cooperate with all of our partners and allies on defense of a free and open Indo-Pacific region. Just in 2021, Canadian and Indian military were cooperating through Operation Sea Dragon. And today, in fact, the Australians have a considerable presence in South India. You may know about that. And there are 10 Canadian armed forces members who are part of that exercise as well. So there's good cooperation so far, and we'd like to deepen that even further.
And also the question that keeps coming up every time is that, can we see Canada becoming part of Quad? Is there any conversation going on around it?
So there isn't really a conversation about Canada becoming a Quad member, but we engage with the Quad. We have excellent relations with all the Quad members. We already have the kind of cooperation that I was just describing now. Operation Sea Dragon is just one example. And we are always happy to work with partners and allies basically to ensure a free and open Indo-Pacific.
Any plans to increase joint military exercises as far as India is concerned, which focuses on this subcontinent?
I think it's absolutely something we should be exploring more deeply.
Also, High Commissioner, talking about bilateral ties, there is this thing about the fact that post-COVID, Indian students had been facing difficulties in entering Canada. Then there was, of course, the threat of monkeypox, and then there was this travel advisory that recently came from the Canadian side. Should Indian students be worried?
Well, let me say first, just with respect to the delays in visa applications, it is absolutely the case that we had an enormous post-COVID backlog of visa applications coming into Canada, which meant that the visas that we used to process in a few weeks were now taking months to process. And that had a negative impact on some Indian students, and very unfortunately. We are getting ahead of that backlog now. I'll add as well that we had a 55% surge in visa applications to Canada in 2022 as compared to 2019. So this put a lot of pressure on the system, but I anticipate that in the coming months we'll get back to more of our normal processing times. The second part of your question, my own view is that I think young Indians should feel absolutely safe and secure on the streets of Canada. Canada is one of the safest countries in the world. We're very proud of that. And I think wherever that's not the case, there are, of course, occasionally there are crimes, there can be tension, etc. The police are quite quick to intervene. Canada is a rule of law country, and we will absolutely enforce the law.
Thank you so much for that. But High Commissioner, last question that I'll have for you is that we have the G20 coming up in Bali very soon this month. Is there a possibility that both PMs, probably prime ministers, will meet again on the sidelines?
Well, they will certainly both be at the G20 summit. I have no doubt that they'll encounter one another there, and I look forward to that.
Thank you so much, High Commissioner. So that was High Commissioner of Canada to India.